The Praise of Folly, Desiderius Erasmus. Erasmus's The Praise of Folly, 1511, is a satirical Latin oration in which the goddess Folly delivers her own encomium, moving from comic self-promotion through a devastating critique of every human institution. Philosophers, lawyers, physicians, theologians, monks, and popes, before revealing Christianity itself as a form of divine madness. Abstract. This summary examines Erasmus's The Praise of Folly as a sustained philosophical argument that proceeds from the comic to the cosmic. Through the audacious conceit of letting Folly herself deliver the eulogy, Erasmus constructs a chain of reasoning that begins with the trivial observation that fools are happier than wise men, moves through the demonstration that self-love and flattery are the indispensable foundations of all social life, friendship, marriage, governance, and turns the corrosive lens on every institution that claims to have vanquished foolishness. The philosophers whose marble simulacrum of a wise man no city would choose, the theologians whose scholastic labyrinth produces questions no apostle would recognize, and the popes whose vestments symbolize the very virtues they have abandoned. The oration culminates in its most startling inversion, that Christianity itself, with its preference for the ignorant, the childlike, and the poor, is a form of divine madness that no alliance with wisdom can equal. Executive summary. Central thesis. Erasmus's central claim is that foolishness, encompassing self-love, pleasure, flattery, and the willingness to be deluded, is not a defect to be eradicated, but the very condition that makes human life bearable and social cohesion possible. Every institution, from marriage to monarchy to the church itself, depends on a sweet infusion of madness to function. Wisdom that cannot accommodate the masks people wear in the comedy of life is no wisdom at all. The work's final and most audacious proposition is that Christianity itself, which God chose to reveal not to the wise but to babes and fools, has a kinship with folly so intimate that no alliance with rational philosophy can compare. Foundational observations. Folly as social cement, self-love, philautia, flattery, kalakia, and forgetfulness, lethe, are not vices but the invisible mechanisms that make friendship, marriage, and political life possible. Without the easygoing ways of folly, no society can endure. The Stoic who scans his friends' faults with eagle-eyed precision can sustain no steady bond. The Silene of Alcibiades, the organizing metaphor of the entire work. Things that appear one way on the surface but reveal themselves as entirely different when you look within. Every institution Erasmus examines is a Silenus. The philosopher's wisdom conceals a marble simulacrum. The theologian's learning conceals a labyrinth of empty questions. The pope's vestments conceal abandoned virtues. The wise man as reductio. Seneca's portrait of the Stoic wise man. Insensible to sympathy, unmoved by love or pity, as if he were solid flint, is not an ideal to aspire to but an absurdity Erasmus exposes. No city would choose such a creature as magistrate. No woman would pick that kind of husband. The Golden Age folk who lived by nature alone were happier than any philosopher. Two kinds of madness. Not all insanity is calamitous. The Furies' madness breeds destruction, war, parricide, sacrilege, while Folly's madness is an amiable dotage that frees the spirit from carking cares and anoints it with delight. The Greek who sat alone in the theater laughing at tragedies not being acted was happier than his supposedly sane friends. Christianity as divine folly. The gospel itself declares that God has chosen the foolish things of the world, that Christ was found in fashion as a man, that the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness. The happiness of Christians, which they pursue with so much travail, is nothing else but a breaking free of the soul from its bodily bonds, appearing to the multitude as madness, but constituting the highest form of divine possession. Significance and recommendation. The Praise of Folly remains one of the most intellectually daring works of the Western tradition because it asks a question that philosophy, theology, and law have spent 2 millennia trying to silence. What if foolishness is not the enemy of the good life, but its most faithful companion? The work matters not for its satirical targets, many of which are of its own moment, but for its enduring insistence that the boundary between wisdom and folly is a human invention, and that the deepest truths often were the face of the fool. It is essential reading for anyone interested in Renaissance humanism, the philosophy of humor, the critique of institutional authority, or the paradoxes at the heart of Christian theology. Exordium, Folly's welcome. I step before this crowded assembly, and the effect is instantaneous. Faces brighten with a fresh and unwanted cheerfulness, brows unbend, and you sit flushed with nepenthe as if you had wandered out of the cave of Trophonius into the warmth of a spring morning. What the greatest orators can barely achieve with a long, carefully planned speech, I have done in a moment with nothing but my looks. That a goddess of foolishness should stand before the schoolmen, the theologians, the philosophers who would sooner be seen consorting with the devil than with Moria herself, and that her very presence should work this miracle, is the first joke of the enterprise, and it is not the last. Not Hercules, not Solon, not any hero of antiquity receives the eulogy. I praise myself, and I do so with the cheerful impudence of one who knows that self-praise is the only honest praise left in a world saturated with flattery. The courtier hires a sycophantic poet, the scholar engages a prattling rhetorician, and both sit blushing while their hired tongues drape them in feathers borrowed from peacocks and eagles. I, by contrast, need no intermediary. I am my own flute player, my own trumpeter, and the arrangement is at least candid. Let no one object that it is most foolish and insolent for a person to praise himself. Let it be as foolish as they would have it, if only they will grant that it is proper. And what is more suitable than that Folly herself should be the trumpeter of her own praises? The enterprise is framed as a game, and yet the stakes are deadly serious. I invite you to lend not your solemn, church-going ears, but the ears you reserve for clowns and mountebanks, the ears that once the hapless Midas turned toward the pipes of Pan. Within this carnival frame, I promise to speak as the ancient sophists did, celebrating virtues in eulogy rather than dissecting vices in satire. Though you who know the sophist's reputation for persuasive indiscrimination will feel the irony hum beneath the surface. The word is stultitia loquitur. Folly speaks, and the audacity is the point. Quote, however mortal folk may commonly speak of me, for I am not ignorant how ill the name of Folly sounds, even to the greatest fools. I am she, the only she, I may say, whose divine influence makes gods and men rejoice. Quote, what great orators elsewhere can hardly bring about in a long, carefully planned speech, I have done in a moment with nothing but my looks. Divine origins, her ancestry and companions. I step before you again, this time to trace my lineage, a matter of some pride, though I confess it is not the sort of pedigree that would earn a place in the herald's books. My father is Plutus, that god of wealth who, despite Hesiod and Homer and Jove himself, is the true father of gods and men. At a single nod of Plutus, all things sacred and profane are turned topsy-turvy. Without his help, even the top gods would be diners at home, keeping house very meagerly. I glory to have such a father, and he did not beget me from his head, as Jupiter did that austere Pallas, but from youth, the loveliest and jolliest nymph of all, in a union not confined to the irksome marriage bond but mingled in love, as our father Homer puts it. My birthplace, too, is one of privilege. I was not brought forth in floating Delos or on the foaming sea, but in the Fortunate Isles where all things grow without plowing or planting. There is no drudgery or old age, no sickness, and the fields are not choked with daffodils or beans, but adorned with moly, panacea, nepenthes, ambrosia, lotus, rose, violet, and the gardens of Adonis. I did not enter life with weeping, but laughed sweetly at my mother, nor do I envy Jupiter his she-goat nurse, since two charming nymphs nourish me at their breasts, drunkenness, offspring of Bacchus, and ignorance, Pan's daughter. And here you see my attendants, my household servants, whose faithful help I bring to every sort of business. If you wish to know their names, You will hear them from me in Greek. This one with the eyebrows haughtily raised is Philautia, self-love, the engine of all accomplishment. She with the smiling eyes, clapping her hands, is Calakia, flattery, that oil which lubricates the hinges of every court. The one half asleep, drowsy, is Lethe, forgetfulness, who erases the memory of past misfortunes. She that leans on her elbows, hands folded, is Misophonia, dislike of toil, who spares us the drudgery of effort. Hedon, wearing the rosy wreath and smelling of perfumes, is pleasure itself. The lady with uncertain eyes rolling here, and there is Anoia, folly's own sister, mindlessness. She with the glistening skin and body in good point is Tryphe, luxury, who adorns us with fine raiment. And you see two male gods among the girls, Comus, the god of revelry, and Negritos Hypnos, that heavy sleep who attends all festivity. Philautia, self-love, the bias that makes each person believe themselves the center of the world, and thus the engine of all endeavor. Calakia, flattery, the universal lubricant of social life, without which no court, no parliament, no academy could function. Lethe, forgetfulness, the mercy that spares us the crushing weight of memory, allowing us to rise each morning unburdened. Misophonia, dislike of toil, the aversion to effort that paradoxically produces the most delightful inventions, comforts, luxuries, and arts. Hedon, pleasure, the true end of all living things, the goal toward which nature herself strains. Anoia, mindlessness, the happy confusion that prevents us from seeing the full horror of our condition. Tryphe, luxury, the adornment of life with beauty and excess, which makes existence bearable. Comus, revelry, the god of feast and festivity, who dissolves the boundaries between high and low. Negritos Hypnos, deep sleep, the brother of death, who grants us daily oblivion and refreshment. Quote, not Chaos, or Orcus, or Saturn, or Iapetus, or any other of that old-fashioned and musty set of gods, was my father at all. It was Plutus who only, in spite of Hesiod, Homer, and Jove himself to boot, is the father of gods and men. Quote, I was not brought forth in floating Delos, or on the foaming sea, or in hollow caverns, but right in the fortunate isles, where all things grow without plowing or planting. Folly's dominion, pleasure, self-love, and social life. I have shown you my family, my companions, my birthplace. Now let me demonstrate the breadth of my dominion, the advantages I bestow on gods and men, and how my power displays itself across the whole of life. If, as someone has judiciously observed, this only is to be a god, to help men, and if deservedly they have been admitted to the rank of gods who have shown to mortals the use of wine, or grain, or any other such commodity, why am not I of right named and venerated as the Alpha of all gods, who single-handed bestow all things on all men? What can be dearer than life itself? And the beginning and first principle of life is owed to whom else but me? Not Pallas's spear, nor Jove's shield procreates the children of men. Even the Father of gods must lay aside his thunderbolt and assume another character if he wishes to beget children. The wise man must send for me if he ever wishes to become a father. Nay, rather that foolish part which cannot be named without laughter is the propagator of the human race. From this brisk and silly little game of mine come forth the haughty philosophers, kings in their scarlet, pious priests, and triply most holy popes. But let it be accounted a little thing that the seed plot of existence is mine, if I do not show that whatever is profitable in any life is also of my giving. Can life be called life at all if you take away pleasure? The famous Stoics do not really scorn pleasure, but they studiously dissemble and attack it in public, only to the end that, with other people scared off, they may enjoy it more liberally. What part of life is not sad, unpleasant, graceless, flat, and burdensome, unless you have pleasure added to it? That is a seasoning of folly. As proof, there is that lovely tribute by Sophocles, "To know nothing affords the happiest life." The earliest period of life is by far the happiest. The enchantment of folly wins children the favor of their nurses and parents, making them forget the pains of bringing them up. Adolescence, too, derives its grace from me, by whose favor the young know so little. And how lightly worn is that little! The farther one gets from me, the less he lives, until irksome old age arrives. Yet even old age I redeem. I bring those who have one foot in the grave back to their infancy again, leading them to my spring of Lethe, so they may drink draughts of forgetfulness. They dote and play the fool, precisely to renew one's infancy. I hate a boy of premature wisdom, says the folk proverb, and who could bear an old man with the vigor and sharpness of youth? The dotard is exempt from carking cares, an acceptable pot companion, a source of pleasure to his friends. Bacchus gives wine, Ceres bread, Neptune a trident, Vulcan a forge, but I give oblivion of cares, the grace of youth, a second childhood, and a new life. And what a friendship! That admired good, which even the philosophers name among the greatest. I am both its stem and its stern, conniving at your friends' vices, being blind to them, even loving and admiring your friends' egregious faults as if they were virtues. Does not this seem pretty close to folly? Think of the fellow who kisses the mole on his mistress's neck, or the father who says of his cross-eyed son that his eyes twinkle. Yet this same foolishness both joins friends and keeps their friendship alive. The Stoics, with their eagle-eyed vision scanning the faults of friends while sand-blind toward their own, can sustain no steady friendship. Close friendship grows up only between equals, between those who dote in many ways, and it is attended by that which the Greeks call upsilon theta iota alpha, folly, or easy-going ways. Cupid himself is stricken in the eyes, so that what is not beautiful seems so, and thus the gaffer dotes on the gammer, and the knave on the wench. Ridiculous as these things are, they cement and bind together our agreeable social life. What has been said of friendship applies even better to marriage, the indivisible bond of life. What divorces would not happen were not the domestic association propped up and fostered by flattery, by jesting, by pliableness, ignorance, dissimulation, satellites of mine, remember. How few marriages would come off if the husband prudently inquired what tricks his seemingly coy lady had played before the wedding. But these blessings are owed to folly. She brings it about that the wife pleases the husband pleases the wife, the household is tranquil, the alliance holds. In sum, no society, no union in life could be either pleasant or lasting without me. No people tolerates its prince, no master his servant, no friend his friend, no wife her husband, except as they mutually or by turns are mistaken, on occasion flatter, on occasion wisely wink, and otherwise soothe themselves with the sweetness of folly. Yet you're going to hear what is greater still. I ask you, will he who hates himself love anyone? Will he who does not get along with himself agree with another? But were you to bar me out, each man would become a stench in his own nostrils. Nature has sowed some seed of evil in the breasts of mortal men, particularly of men somewhat judicious, which makes them dissatisfied with what is their own, while admiring what belongs to another. Philautia, my sister's self-love, stands at your right hand, and without her, though you may be a handsome Nereus, you will appear like Thersites. You will seem a Nestor, though a Phaon. That is how necessary it is to capture your own fancy, to appreciate your own value by a bit of self-applause, before you can be held in price by others. Where nature has withheld some of her bounties, she is wont to add a little more self-love. But I have made a foolish saying, for self-love is itself the greatest bounty of nature. Pleasure, the essential seasoning of life, without which existence is sad, unpleasant, graceless, flat, and burdensome. Even the Stoics who publicly scorn pleasure secretly depend on it. Their severity is a mask for a more refined indulgence. Friendship, a bond that can only survive between equals who share the human propensity to dote. The Greek upsilon theta, iota alpha, folly, or easygoing ways, is the invisible mortar of all social affection, allowing friends to overlook faults and admire each other's egregious faults as if they were virtues. Marriage, the indivisible bond of life, that would shatter without the satellites of flattery, jesting, pliableness, ignorance, and dissimulation. The husband who discovers his wife's premarital tricks would find few marriages lasting. Ignorance, not wisdom, keeps the household tranquil. Self-love, the bias that makes each person satisfied with yourself and admire yourself, the necessary precondition for being held in price by others. Without Philautia, the handsome Nereus appears as Thersites, the eloquent Nestor as the tongue-tied Phaon. Quote, "Can life be called life at all if you take away pleasure?" You applaud. I knew that none of you is so wise, or rather so foolish. No, I prefer to say so wise, as to err on that point. Quote, "No society, no union in life, could be either pleasant or lasting without me. A people does not for long tolerate its prince, or a master tolerate his servant, a handmaiden or mistress, a teacher his student, a friend his friend, a wife or husband, a landlord his tenant, a partner his partner, or a boarder his fellow boarder, except as they mutually or by turns are mistaken, on occasion flatter, on occasion wisely wink, and otherwise soothe themselves with the sweetness of folly." Self-love, the engine of accomplishment. I come now to the heart of my household, to the companion who stands closest to my right hand, and without whom none of my other gifts could operate. Philautia, self-love. She is the bias that makes each person believe themselves the center of the world. And that belief is not a delusion, but the very engine of all human accomplishment. Without her, the orator's speech goes flat and cold. The musician's notes turn sour. The actor is hissed from the stage. The painter's pictures are cheap, and the doctor famishes among his medicines. Take this ingredient from life, and grace itself collapses. I have said it before, and I say it again. Self-love is the seed plot of every great exploit, the fountain of every invention, the secret motive that drives men to labor by night and sweat for a glory they can never fully grasp. Why does the candidate flatter the people by their favor with doles, endure the jeers and shouts of the mob, and submit to the indignity of parades? Why does the soldier throw himself into battle, the sailor brave the tempest, the scholar burn the midnight oil? Not for wisdom. The wise man, as I have shown, is a stammering fool in public life, but for the sweet poison of self-esteem, for the conviction that he is someone, that his name will echo beyond his grave. This is Philautia's work. She makes the impossible seem possible, the dangerous seem glorious, the tedious seem worthwhile. Without her, the world would be a desert of hesitation, a graveyard of abandoned projects, a parliament of the mute. Nature herself has recognized this truth. Where she has withheld some of her bounties, she adds a little more self-love. But I have made a foolish saying, for self-love is itself the greatest bounty of nature. It is the universal solvent of discontent, the alchemy that transmutes inadequacy into confidence, mediocrity into genius. The fool who loves himself is richer than the wise man who despises himself. For the fool at least can act, and action is the mother of all achievement. Quote, "Without self-love, though you may be a handsome Nereus, you will appear like Thersites. You will seem a Nestor, though a Phaon, a sow instead of Minerva, tongue-tied instead of eloquent, a gawk instead of a man of the world." Quote, "Self-love is itself the greatest bounty of nature." The critique of the wise, philosophers, and their follies. I turn now to the heart of my argument, the critique of those who claim to possess wisdom. Consider first the two-faced nature of all human affairs, which the ancient Greeks called the Silene of Alcibiades. Things appear one way on the surface, yet reveal themselves as entirely different when you look within. What seems like death may prove to be life. What appears beautiful may be ugly. The wealthy may be poor. The learned may be ignorant. All things reverse when you open the Silenus. This is the fundamental insight the wise fail to grasp, because they mistake appearances for reality and believe their learning has penetrated to the truth. But truth itself is a kind of foolishness and wisdom that cannot accommodate the masks people wear in the comedy of life is no wisdom at all. It is merely unseasonable prudence. Now consider what would happen if some wise man, dropping down from the sky, confronted this assembly and declared that the person accepted as a god is really driven by passions like a sheep, or that the one mourning his father's death should laugh, because death is merely the beginning of life, or that the one glorying in ancestry is base because he is far from virtue. Would this wise man be honored or driven out? As nothing is more foolish than imprudent wisdom, so nothing is more imprudent than unseasonable wisdom. The part of a truly prudent man is to play along with the comedy, not to demand that the play cease to be a play. My fools understand this instinctively. The wise never learn it. And when I speak of the wise man, let me paint you a portrait of this creature the Stoics hold up as the pinnacle of human achievement. Seneca, that double-strength Stoic, subtracts from the wise man all perturbations of the soul, every emotion, every passion, every weakness that makes us human. What remains is no man at all, but a new kind of god or demiurgos who never existed and will never emerge. To speak plainly, Seneca creates a marble simulacrum, a senseless block, completely alien to every human feeling. This supposed wise man is insensible to sympathy, unmoved by love or pity, as if he were solid flint. He makes no mistakes, forgives nothing, values no friend, bids the gods go hang themselves. He condemns as unwholesome whatever life may offer and derides it. What city would choose such a creature as magistrate? What army would want that kind of general? What woman would pick that kind of husband? Who would have such a guest? I ask you to contrast this marble philosopher with my natural fools. The fool who lives by instinct rather than learning enjoys advantages the wise man can never claim. He is free from fear of death, no small blessing, and free from the tortures of conscience. He is not frightened by tales of ghosts, not tormented by dread of impending evils, not blown up with hope of future good. He does not feel shame or fear. He is not ambitious. He does not envy. He does not love in the anguished way the wise man loves. He is continually merry. He plays, sings, and laughs. And what is more, he brings to others pleasure, jesting, sport, and laughter, as if he were created by the gods to drive away the sadness of human life. Wild beasts, by a certain natural sense of innocence, refrain from doing him harm. He is held sacred. The Golden Age folk flourished without any armament of sciences, being guided only by nature and instinct. What need was there of grammar when all spoke the same language? What use for dialectic where there was no battle of opinions? What room for rhetoric when no man cared to make trouble for his neighbor? They had too much piety to search with profane curiosity the secrets of nature, to investigate the dimensions and motions of the stars, deeming it a sacrilege for mortal man to try to know more than is proper to his station. As the pristine simplicity slipped away, the arts were discovered by evil spirits, as I have told, but they were few in number and accepted by few people. The Chaldean superstition and Greek frivolous curiosity added hundreds of them, mere vexations of the spirit, seeing that a single system of grammar will amply provide continuous torture through a long lifetime. And yet among these disciplines, the ones that approach nearest to common sense, that is, to folly, are held in highest esteem. Theologians are starved, naturalists find cold comfort, astrologers are mocked, logicians are slighted. The doctor alone is worth all the rest put together, and medicine as now practiced is but a subdivision of the art of flattery, no less truly than is rhetoric. Lawyers have the next place, and great matters and little alike are settled by the arbitrament of these asses. As those arts are more successful which have the greatest affinity with folly, so those people are by far the happiest who enjoy the privilege of avoiding all contact with the learned disciplines and who follow nature as their only guide. Nature hates counterfeits, and that which is innocent of art gets along far more prosperously. Among the several kinds of living creatures, the ones which live most happily are those farthest from any discipline and controlled by no other master than nature. What could be more happy than the bees, or more wonderful? They do not seem to have all the bodily senses. Yet what has architecture discovered that can match their principles of construction? What philosopher has ever framed a republic equal to theirs? The horse, so far as he has senses like to man's and travels about with companies of men, is also a partaker in human misfortunes. Many a horse feels shame to be outrun, and for that reason becomes wind-broken by often racing. How much more desirable is the life of flies and birds, living for the moment and solely by the light of nature. Therefore I shall never praise enough that cock who was really Pythagoras. Though but one, he had been all things, a philosopher, a man, a woman, a king, a subject, a fish, a horse, a frog, even a sponge, and he came to the conclusion that no creature is more miserable than man, for all the others are satisfied with their natural limitations, but man alone strives to go beyond the bounds proper to his station. Among men, this cock ranked simpletons above the learned and great. That fellow Gryllus was not a little wiser than Odysseus of the many counsels, when he elected to grunt in a sty rather than expose himself, along with that worthy, to painful mishaps. Ulysses was miserable precisely because he was overly wise, getting too far away from the guidance of nature. Those who are zealous for wisdom are farthest from happiness, being fools twice over. They forget their own station and, like the giants, wage war on nature with arts and sciences as their engines. Quote, "The wise man is insensible to any natural sympathy, no more moved by feelings of love or pity than as if he were solid flint or Marpesian stone. Nothing gets by him. He never makes a mistake. He alone is satisfied with himself alone, uniquely rich, uniquely sane, uniquely a king, uniquely a free man. In short, uniquely all things, but notably unique in his own judgment. He values no friend, himself the friend of none." Quote, "Among mortals, they who are zealous for wisdom are farthest from happiness, being by the same token fools twice over. That is, although they are born men, they then so far forget their own station as to hanker after the life of the immortal gods. And on the example of the giants, with arts and sciences as their engines, they wage war on nature. Madness, a taxonomy of beneficial insanities. Now I must confront the Stoics directly, those Stoic frogs who croak at me that nothing is sadder than madness, that flagrant folly is either very near madness, or, what is more likely, it is the same thing. They speak of madness as if it were one undifferentiated disease, a single calamity to be shunned. But I ask them, what is madness but a wandering of the wits? And do not the wise themselves wander the whole way, only in a more expensive and self-important fashion? Let me, with the Muses prospering us, tear this syllogism wide open. Just as Plato teaches us to make two Venuses by splitting the usual one, and two Cupids by cutting Cupid apart, so I must distinguish madness from madness, at least if the dialecticians wish to be thought sane themselves. For certainly all madness is not calamitous. Horace would not have spoken of a dear madness playing upon him. Plato would not have placed that friendly fury of poets, prophets, and lovers among the chief blessings of life. The Sibyl would not have spoken of the insane labor of Aeneas. The fact is that madness is a genus comprising two species. One the revenging Furies send secretly from hell whenever, with their snaky locks unbound, they put into the hearts of mortal men lust for war, or insatiable thirst for wealth, shameful and illicit love, parricide, incest, sacrilege, or any other bane of that sort, or when they hound the guilty and stricken soul with fiends or with torch-bearing goblins. The other kind is far different from this. It comes, you see, from me, and of all things is most to be desired. It is present whenever an amiable dotage of the mind at once frees the spirit from carking cares and anoints it with a complex delight. And such a dotage of the mind Cicero, writing to Atticus, wished for as a special bounty of the gods, for thereby he could lose his sense of the great evils of the time. Consider that Greek in Horace, whose madness took the form of sitting alone in the theater all day long, laughing, applauding, cheering, because he thought fine tragedies were being acted before him, though nothing at all was on the stage. Yet he conducted himself acceptably in other relations of life, pleasant with his friends, kind to his wife, and so indulgent to his servants that they might open a bottle of his wine without his going into a rage. When the care of his family and medical treatment had driven away these fits, and he was fully restored to himself, he protested to his friends, "By Pollux, you have killed me, not saved me," he said, "taking away my enjoyments this way, and destroying by force the very pleasant illusion of my mind." And rightly, for they were themselves doting and had more need for hellebore, when they looked upon such a lucky and pleasant delusion as a disease to be driven out by potions. The fact is that the more ways a man is deluded, the happier he is, if folly is any judge. Only let him remain in that kind of madness which is peculiarly my own, and which is so widespread that I do not know whether out of the whole world of mortals it is possible to find one who is wise at all times of day, and who is not subject to some extravagance. Thus one madman laughs at another. Turn about, and they minister to each other's mutual pleasure. You will often see it happen that the madder man laughs more uproariously at the one who is not so mad. Fury's madness, the catastrophic insanity sent from hell, breeding lust for war, insatiable thirst for wealth, shameful love, parricide, incest, and sacrilege, the destructive frenzy that hounds the guilty soul with fiends and torch-bearing goblins. Folly's madness, the amiable dotage that frees the spirit from carking cares and anoints it with complex delight, a beneficent delusion that makes life bearable and even joyful. Delusive self-love, the widespread madness whereby hunters believe their butchering of game is noble. Nobles trace their lineage to Aeneas or King Arthur, and nations flatter themselves with unique virtues, each madman laughing at the next, yet all finding happiness in their illusions. Quote, "A fool speaks foolish things. Whatever a fool has in his heart, that he sets also in his face and utters in his speech." To this order belong the fellows who renounce everything else in favor of hunting wild game, and protest they feel an ineffable pleasure in their souls whenever they hear the raucous blast of the horns and the yelping of the hounds. Even the dung of the dogs, I am sure, smells like cinnamon to them. And what is so sweet as a beast being butchered? Cutting up bulls and oxen is properly given over to the humble plebeian, but is a crime for game to be slaughtered except by a gentleman, there, with his head bared on bended knees, with a knife designed just for this, for it is sacrilege to use any other. With certain ceremonial gestures he cuts just the proper members in the approved order. The company stands in silence, wondering as at some great novelty, although it has seen the same spectacle 1,000 times. And if some bit of the animal is handed one of them to taste, he thinks he has gone up a step or so in the ranks of nobility. And thus with their butchering and eating of beasts they accomplish nothing at all, unless it be to degenerate into beasts themselves, though they think, all the while, they are living the life of a king. Very like to these is the class of men who, while differing in no respect from the meanest tinker, flatter themselves beyond measure with the empty title of nobility. One will trace his family back to Aeneas, one to Brutus, and a third to King Arthur. In every room they display pictures and busts of their ancestors. They have by heart the ancient names, while all the time they are not so different from senseless statues themselves, and are worth, it may be, less than the ones they show off. Yet by virtue of my lovely companion Philautia, they lead a pleasant life. There will always be other fools, too, to admire specimens of this breed as if they were gods. And now I see that it is not only in individual men that nature has implanted self-love. She implants a kind of it as a common possession in the various races and even cities. By this token the English claim, besides a few other things, good looks, music, and the best eating as their special properties. The Scots flatter themselves on the score of high birth and royal blood, not to mention their dialectical skill. Frenchmen have taken all politeness for their province. though the Parisians, brushing all others aside, also award themselves the prize for knowledge of theology. The Italians usurp belles lettres and eloquence, and they all flatter themselves upon the fact that they alone, of all mortal men, are not barbarians. In this particular point of happiness the Romans stand highest, still dreaming pleasantly of ancient Rome. The Venetians are blessed with a belief in their own nobility. The Greeks, as well as being the founders of the learned disciplines, vaunt themselves upon their titles to the famous heroes of old. The Turks, and that whole rabble of the truly barbarous, claim praise for their religion, laughing at Christians as superstitious. And what is much more pleasant, the Jews still are awaiting their own Messiah, and even today hold on to their Moses with might and main. Spaniards yield to no one in martial reputation. Germans take pride in their great stature and their knowledge of magic. Quote, "Happiness resides in opinion, not in things. For such is the obscurity and variety of human affairs that nothing can be clearly known." But not to pursue details, I am sure you observe how Philautia is the parent of delight for men, in particular and in general, and her sister Flattery is almost as fruitful. Indeed, Philautia is nothing but a cajoling of one's own self. Do the same thing to someone else, and it becomes Calakia. My Flattery raises the dejected spirit. It soothes those who are grieving, freshens the faint, quickens the dull, eases the suffering, mollifies the fierce, joins loves together, and keeps them so joined. It allures childhood to pursue the study of literature. It cheers the old, and, under the color of praise, it warns and instructs princes without offense. In brief, it acts to make every man more pleasing and more dear to himself. This is indeed the main point of happiness. What is more gracious than the way two mules scratch each other? It is a sad thing, they say, to be deceived. No, the saddest thing is not to be deceived. For they are quite beside the mark who think that the happiness of a man is to be found in things. As such, it resides in opinion. For such is the obscurity and variety of human affairs that nothing can be clearly known. Or if something can be known, usually it is something that makes against the enjoyment of life. Finally, the mind of man is so constructed that it is taken far more with disguises than with realities. If anyone wants to make a convincing and easy test of this, let him go to church and listen to sermons. If something solid is being said, everybody sleeps or yawns or is ill at ease. But if the baller, "I made a slip, I meant to say preacher," as they so often do, begins some old wives' tale, everybody awakens, straightens up, and gapes for it. Also, if there is a somewhat fabulous or poetical saint, and if you want an example, imagine George or Christopher or Barbara to belong to this class. You will see him honored much more religiously than Peter or Paul or even Christ himself. But these things do not belong here. The satire of social orders, lawyers, physicians, poets, and philosophers. I turn now to those who maintain among mortals an appearance of wisdom, those who seek the golden bough of learning and yet find themselves in my debt more than they would ever admit. Among these, the grammarians hold first place. Nothing could be more calamity-stricken, nothing more afflicted, than this generation of men. Nothing so hated of God, if I were not at hand to mitigate the pains of their wretched profession by a certain sweet infusion of madness. They are liable to 600 curses, hunger-starved and dirty in their schools. I said their schools, but it were better said their knowledge factories or their mills among herds of boys. There they grow old with their labors, deafened by the noise, sickened by the stench and nastiness. Yet thanks to me, they see themselves as first among men. So greatly do they please themselves when they terrify the timorous band by a menacing look and tone, when they beat the little wretches with ferrules, rods, or straps, and when, imitating the ass in Aesop, they storm fiercely in all directions. All the dirtiness seems sheer elegance. The stench is perfume of sweet marjoram, and the miserable servitude considered to be a kingdom, such a one that they would not trade their tyranny for the empire of Phalaris or Dionysius. But nowadays they are especially happy in their new illusion of being learned. Of course they cram their pupils with utter nonsense, But, good Lord, what Palamon, what Donatus, do they not scorn in comparison with themselves? I do not know by what sleight of hand they work it so well, but to the foolish mothers and addle-pated fathers of their pupils, they seem to be just what they make themselves out to be. On top of this, they have another pleasure. When one of them can drag out of some worm-eaten manuscript such a fact as the name of Anchises' mother, or some word not generally known, such as bubsequa, bovinator, or manticulator, or if one can dig up somewhere a fragment of an ancient tombstone with an inscription badly worn away. O Jupiter! What exulting then, what triumphs, what panegyrics, as if they had conquered Africa or captured Babylon. As for those stilted, insipid verses they display on all occasions, and there are those to admire them, obviously the writer believes that the soul of Virgil has transmigrated into his own breast. But the funniest sight of all is to see them admiring and praising each other, trading compliment for compliment, thus mutually scratching each other's itch. Yet if one commits a lapse in a single word, and another more quick-sighted by happy chance lights on it, O Hercules, what a stir presently! What scufflings, what insults, what invectives! I used to know a certain polymath versed in Greek, Latin, mathematics, philosophy, and medicine, and a master of them all, then some 60 years old. Laying aside all the others, he vexed and tortured himself with grammar for more than 20 years, deeming that he would be happy if he were allowed to live until he had settled with certainty how the 8 parts of speech are to be distinguished, a thing which none of the Greeks or Latins succeeded in doing definitively. Thanks to this, there are as many grammars as there are grammarians. Nay more, for my friend Aldous single-handed produced grammars on more than 5 occasions. He has overlooked no work of the kind, however barbarously and tediously written. He has expounded each and criticized each, jealous of everybody who may be toiling, however ineptly, in the same field. Do you prefer to call this madness or folly? It is no great matter to me. Only confess that it is done with my assistance. The poets owe less to me, though by their own avowal they are of my faction, being a race of free souls, as the proverb has it, all of whose efforts tend to no other end than soothing the ears of fools with vapid trifles and silly stories. And yet they so rely on these things, strange to say, that they not only promise themselves immortality and a life equal to that of the gods, but they also assure as much to others. Philautia and Calakia are more intimate with this fraternity than with others, nor am I worshipped by any tribe of men more sincerely or with greater constancy. As for the rhetoricians, though they sometimes play both sides against the middle and collude with the philosophers, they're also of my party on many counts, although this chiefly proves it. Besides much other nonsense, they have written so critically and so much on the method of joking. Whoever he was who wrote the art of rhetoric ad Herennium includes folly itself as one species of humor. And in the work of Quintilian, easily the prince of this realm, there's a chapter longer than the Iliad on the subject of raising laughter. In general, they allow this much to folly, that many times what cannot be refuted by arguments can be parried by laughter. Quote, "Nothing could be more calamity-stricken, nothing more afflicted, than this generation of men, nothing so hated of God, if I were not at hand to mitigate the pains of their wretched profession by a certain sweet infusion of madness." Quote, "The poets owe less to me, though by their own avowal they are of my faction, being a race of free souls, as the proverb has it, all of whose efforts tend to no other end than soothing the ears of fools with vapid trifles and silly stories." The theologians, folly's greatest debtor. Perhaps it were better to pass over the theologians in silence, and not to move such a lay camerina, or to handle such an herb anagerus foetida, as that marvelously supercilious and irascible race. For they may attack me with 600 arguments in squadrons and drive me to make a recantation, which if I refuse, they will straightway proclaim me an heretic. By this thunderbolt they are wont to terrify any toward whom they are ill-disposed. No other people are so loath to acknowledge my favors to them, yet the divines are bound to me by no ordinary obligations. They are happy in their self-love, And as if they already inhabited the third heaven, they look down from a height on all other mortal men, as on creatures that crawl on the ground, and they come near to pitying them. They are protected by a wall of scholastic definitions, arguments, corollaries, implicit and explicit propositions. They have so many hideaways that they could not be caught even by the net of Vulcan, for they slip out on their distinctions, by which also they cut through all knots as easily as with a double-bit axe from Tenitos, and they abound with newly invented prodigious terms and vocables. Furthermore, they explain as pleases them the most arcane matters, such as by what method the world was founded and set in order, through what conduits original sin has been passed down along the generations, by what means, in what measure, and how long the perfect Christ was in the Virgin's womb, and how accidents subsist in the Eucharist without their subject. But those are hackneyed. Here are questions worthy of the great and, as some call them, illuminated theologians, questions to make them prick up their ears, if ever they chance upon them. Whether divine generation took place at a particular time, whether there are several sonships in Christ, whether this is a possible proposition, God the Father hates the Son, whether God could have taken upon himself the likeness of a woman, or of a devil, of an ass, of a gourd, of a piece of flint, then how would that gourd have preached, performed miracles, or been crucified? Also, what would Peter have consecrated if he had administered the sacrament while Christ's body hung upon the cross? Also, whether at that moment Christ could be said to be a man, and whether after the resurrection it will be forbidden to eat and drink. Now, while there is time, they are providing against hunger and thirst. These fine-spun trifles are numberless, with others even more subtle, having to do with instants of time, notions, relations, accidents, quiddities, entities, which no one can perceive with his eyes unless, like Lynceus, he can see in blackest darkness things that are not there. Scholastic labyrinth, the tangled web of realists, nominalists, Thomists, Albertists, Occamists, and Scotists, sects so numerous and subtle that you will escape from a labyrinth more quickly than from the tangles of their disputes, each claiming to hold up the universal church by the props of their syllogisms. Theological pomp, the theologians' self-congratulatory air, their barbarous jabber that only fellow theologians can understand, their insistence that sacred discourse need not obey the rules of grammarians, a marvelous prerogative they share with most tinkers. Apostolic irony, the bitter comparison between the apostles, who preach by life and miracle, and the modern theologians, who would need some other spirit if they were to try disputing on these topics with a new generation of theologues. Quote, "No other people are so loath to acknowledge my favors to them, yet the divines are bound to me by no ordinary obligations. They are happy in their self-love, and as if they already inhabited the third heaven, they look down from a height on all other mortal men as on creatures that crawl on the ground." Quote, "You will escape from a labyrinth more quickly than from the tangles of realists, nominalists, Thomists, Albertists, Occamists, Scotists. I have not named all, but the chief ones only. But in all these sects there is so much learning and so much difficulty that I should think the apostles themselves must needs have the help of some other spirit if they were to try disputing on these topics with our new generation of theologues. Monks and friars, their follies. I come now to those who call themselves the religious and monks, utterly false names both, since most of them keep as far away as they can from religion, and no people are more in evidence in every sort of place. People detest this race so thoroughly that meeting one by accident is supposed to be bad luck, yet they flatter themselves to the Queen's taste. They reckon it the highest degree of piety to have no contact with literature, and hence they see to it that they do not know how to read. When, with asinine voices, they bray out in church those psalms they have learned by rote rather than by heart, they are convinced that they are anointing God's ears with the blandest of oil. Some of them make a good profit from their dirtiness and mendicancy, collecting food from door to door with importunate bellowing. There is not an inn, public conveyance, or ship where they do not intrude. Yet according to their account, by their very dirtiness, ignorance, want of manners, and insolence, these delightful fellows are representing to us the lives of the apostles. What is funnier than to find that they do everything by rule, employing, as it were, the methods of mathematics, and to slip up is a great crime. There must be just so many knots for each shoe, and the shoestring must be of a certain color. The habit must be decked with just so much trimming. The girdle must be of a certain width. The hood must be of just so many measures. The fast must be kept on so many days. They must mutter so many prayers and so many times. One order differs from another in these minutiae, and yet each one thinks it has about the best religion in the world. These men are so happy in these trifles that they deem one heaven hardly a suitable reward for their labors, never recalling that the time will come when, with all these things held of no account, Christ will demand a reckoning of that which he has prescribed, namely, charity. I often get a good laugh myself when these theologians that loom up so vast in their own eyes begin speaking in their slovenly and barbarous idiom and can jabber so that no one except a fellow jabberer can understand them, reaching a pitch, highest acumen they call it, whereto the vulgar cannot climb. For they affirm that it suits not with the dignity of sacred discourse to be forced to obey the rules of grammarians. O marvelous prerogative of theologians, if to speak incorrectly is reserved to them alone. Their sermons are a spectacle worth the price of admission. Tell me, what comic actor or mountebank would you rather watch than these monks rhetoricizing, droll in every aspect, but neatly exemplifying all the lore which the rhetoricians have handed down? Good Lord, how they gesticulate, how aptly they modulate the voice, how they intone, throw themselves about, suddenly put on a new face, and confuse all things by their bawling. They commence with an invocation borrowed from the poets. If they're to speak of charity, they begin with the river Nile in Egypt. If they are to expound the cross, they take a start from Baal, the Babylonian snake god. I have heard of one who explained the Holy Trinity by way of letters, syllables, and words from the agreement of noun and verb. While everybody was lost in wonder, and some were murmuring that phrase from Horace, "What does all this stink about?" Another showed with admirable subtlety that in the letters of the name Jesus was hidden everything that could be said about him. The three cases symbolizing the threefold nature of God, and the final letters spelling out, through a labyrinth of etymology, that Jesus takes away the sin of the world. Yet nobody dares quite to scorn these people, though they are secluded from the life of the state. And least of all dares one scorn the mendicants, because they get hold of everybody's secrets by means of what they call confessions. They account it a crime to publish these, except, as it may happen, when they are in drink, that they wish to have some fun telling good stories, and will divulge a matter by hints, suppressing, of course, the names. If anyone affronts these wasps, they will take suitable revenge in public sermons, and point out their enemy by indirect expressions so cunningly that no one will misunderstand unless he understands nothing. Nor will they make an end of barking until you throw a sop into their mouths. But when the last judgment arrives, each one will boast of his special accomplishment. One a paunch padded with every kind of fish, another 100 bushels of hymns, another myriads of fasts, another a pile of ceremonies so big that 7 ships could scarcely carry it. But Christ, interrupting their boasts, will say, "Whence comes this new race of Jews? I recognize one commandment which is truly mine, and of that I hear nothing. Of old in the sight of all men, and using no device of parable, I promised the inheritance of my Father, not to cowls, orisons, or fasts, but to works of charity. And when they shall see common sailors and teamsters preferred above them, with what faces, think you, will they look wistfully on each other? Yet meanwhile, with some assistance from me, they are happy in their good hope." Ritual obsession, the monk's devotion to infinitesimal rules, not counts, girdle widths, hood measures, where each order believes its particular regimen the best religion in the world, yet all forget that Christ will demand reckoning of charity, not of ceremonies. Confessional power, the mendicant's leverage through secret knowledge gathered in confession, deployed as a weapon in sermons where indirect expressions identify enemies so cunningly that no one will misunderstand unless he understands nothing. Quote, "Coming nearest to these in felicity are the men who generally call themselves the religious and monks, utterly false names both, since most of them keep as far away as they can from religion, and no people are more in evidence in every sort of place. Quote, Christ will demand a reckoning of that which he has prescribed, namely, charity. One friar will then show a paunch which has been patted out with every kind of fish. Another will spill out 100 bushels of hymns. But Christ, interrupting their boasts, which otherwise would go on endlessly, will say, Whence comes this new race of Jews? I recognize one commandment which is truly mine, and of that I hear nothing. The popes and prelates, Folly enthroned. Now we come to those who have surpassed even the princes in their devotion to my cause. Our popes, cardinals, and bishops, who for some time now have earnestly copied the state and practice of princes and come near to beating them at their own game. Let me tell you what a bishop should contemplate when he dons his vestments, if contemplation were his habit rather than mine. The alb, that white emblem of sincerity, should teach him a life in every way blameless. The two-horned mitre, with its two peaks bound by the same knot, should signify a perfect knowledge of the Old and New Testaments. The gloves covering his hands should remind him of a clean administration of the sacrament, unsullied by any taint of human concerns. The crozier should symbolize most watchful care of the flock put under his charge. The cross carried before him should indicate a victory over all carnal affections. If he would contemplate these and other lessons of the sort, I say, would he not lead a sad and troubled life? But as it is, they do well enough by way of feeding themselves. As for the other, the care of the sheep, they delegate that to Christ himself, or else refer it to their suffragans, as they call them, or other deputies. Nor do they keep in mind the name they bear, or what the word bishop means: labor, vigilance, solicitude. Yet in raking in moneys they truly play the bishop, overseeing everything and overlooking nothing. The cardinals, if they considered the fact that they have succeeded to the places of the apostles, would see that the same works are required of them as were performed by their predecessors, that they are not lords, but stewards of spiritual things, and that shortly they are to render an exact account of what they hold in trust. Yes, let them too philosophize a bit concerning their vestments, and question themselves in this fashion. What does the whiteness of this upper garment mean? Is it not a notable and singular purity of heart? What the crimson lower garment? Is it not a burning love of God? What, again, that outer robe flowing down in broad folds and spreading over the mule of his exalted reverence, though it would suffice to cover a camel? Is it not charity ample enough to embrace all men in its teaching, exhorting, chastising, by way of admonishing, ending wars, resisting wicked princes, and freely spending blood, not money alone, for the flock of Christ? And wherefore all this money, anyway, for those who hold the places of the needy apostles? If they would weigh these things, I repeat, they would not be so ambitious for the post, and would willingly give it up, or at least they would lead a toilsome and watchful life of the sort lived by those ancient apostles. As to these supreme pontiffs who take the place of Christ, if they tried to emulate his life, I mean his poverty, labors, teaching, cross, and contempt for safety, if even they thought upon the title of Pope, that is, Father, or the addition Most Holy, who on earth would be more afflicted? Who would purchase that seat at the price of every resource and effort? Or who defend it, when purchased by the sword, by poison, or by anything else? Were wisdom to descend upon them, how it would inconvenience them. Wisdom, did I say? Nay, even a grain of salt would do it, a grain of that salt which is spoken of by Christ. It would lose them all that wealth and honor, all those possessions, triumphal progresses, offices, dispensations, tributes, and indulgences. It would lose them so many horses, mules, and retainers, so many pleasures. In place of these, it would bring vigils, fasts, tears, prayers, sermons, studies, sighs, and 1,000 troublesome tasks of the sort. Nor should we pass over the circumstance that all those copyists and notaries would be in want, as would all those advocates, promoters, secretaries, muleteers, grooms, bankers, and pimps. I was about to add something more tender, though rougher, I am afraid, on the ears. In short, that great host of men which burdens, I beg your pardon, I mean adorns, the Roman see would beg for their bread. This would be inhuman and downright abominable. And, what is more accursed, those very princes of the church and true lights of the world would themselves be reduced to a staff and a wallet. Bishops' vestments, the symbolic garments, white alb for sincerity, two-horn mitre for scripture, gloves for clean administration, crozier for pastoral care, cross for victory over carnal affections, each a silent accusation against the prelate who wears them while abandoning every virtue they represent. Cardinal stewardship, the cardinal who reflects on his vestments, the white upper garment for purity of heart, the crimson for burning love of God, the vast outer robe for charity broad enough to embrace all men, would find ambition extinguished and the apostolic life restored. The salt of Christ, a single grain of Christ's salt, if it descended upon the popes, would strip away wealth, honor, possessions, offices, dispensations, indulgences, horses, mules, retainers, and pleasures, replacing them with vigils, fasts, tears, prayers, and 1,000 troublesome tasks. Quote, were wisdom to descend upon them, how it would inconvenience them. Wisdom, did I say? Nay, even a grain of salt would do it. A grain of that salt which is spoken of by Christ. It would lose them all that wealth and honor, all those possessions, triumphal progresses, offices, dispensations, tributes, and indulgences. Quote, as it is now, what labor turns up to be done they hand over to Peter and Paul, who have leisure for it, but the splendor and the pleasure they take care of personally. Christian folly, the theological turn. Now I come to the summit of my argument, the place where I laid down my mask and reveal what I've been hiding all along. You have heard me praise myself to gods and men, to princes and philosophers, to lawyers and physicians, and poets and popes. But there is a higher court still. I must speak before it, the court of Christ himself. For it is here, at the intersection of divine wisdom and human folly, that the whole enterprise of this oration finds its completion and its deepest irony. The Christian religion, which the learned hold to be the very citadel of reason and revelation, turns out upon close inspection to have a kinship with folly so intimate that no alliance with wisdom can compare. Consider first the testimony of Scripture itself. Ecclesiastes, that wisest of preachers, declares in his opening chapter that the number of fools is infinite. And when he calls the number infinite, does he not embrace the whole of mortals, leaving only a handful of the wise, if any exist at all? Jeremiah testifies even more candidly in his 10th chapter. Every man is made foolish by his own wisdom. He attributes wisdom to God alone and leaves folly as the portion of all men. And Solomon, that triply most wise king, confesses in chapter 30, I am the most foolish of men. From so great a writer, from the author of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, you hear such great commendations of folly. What he does, in fact, is publicly to teach and enjoin this folly as a thing specially necessary and good for the town. Let him that seems to be wise among you become a fool, that he may be wise. Paul, the great teacher of the Gentiles, writing to the Corinthians, freely owned to the name, I speak as a fool, he said, I am more. And in another place, we are fools for Christ's sake. He enjoins the same folly upon all believers. Suffer fools gladly, he says, speaking of himself. And again, receive me as a fool. Also, I do not speak according to God, but as if in foolishness. What does all this cry out to us, if not this? That mortal men, even the pious, are fools, and that Christ, in order to relieve the folly of mankind, though himself, the wisdom of the Father, was willing in some manner to be made a fool when he took upon himself the nature of a man and was found in fashion as a man. The point is proved still more cogently by the fact that Christ, when he prayed on the cross for his enemies, Father, forgive them, pleaded no other mitigation than ignorance, saying, for they know not what they do. In like manner Paul wrote to Timothy, but therefore I have obtained the mercy of God, because being ignorant I acted in unbelief. What is the meaning of being ignorant I acted except I acted foolishly, not maliciously? But therefore I obtained the mercy of God, except I should not have obtained it except as I was made more pardonable by the excuse of folly. The mystical psalmist supports me. Remember not the sins of my youth and my ignorances. You have heard him making two excuses: youth, with which I am always a present companion, and ignorance, and this last in the plural number, so that we are to understand a great flood of folly. It would seem, surely, that we ought not to overlook this argument, that folly is so acceptable to the heavenly powers that forgiveness of its errors is assured, whereas nothing is forgiven to wisdom. God looks suspiciously on men who are too clever and hates them. As Julius Caesar suspected and hated Brutus and Cassius, while he did not fear drunken Antony at all, Nero was suspicious of Seneca, Dionysius of Plato, while on the other hand, they take delight in duller and simpler souls. So Christ detests and condemns those wise men who rely on their own prudence. Paul witnesses to this very clearly when he says, God has chosen the foolish things of the world, and when he says, it has pleased God to save the world by foolishness, seeing that it could never be redeemed by wisdom. God points this out clearly enough when he cries through the mouth of the prophet, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and I will reject the prudence of the prudent. And again, our Lord gave thanks that God had concealed the mystery of salvation from the wise, but had revealed it to babes, that is, to fools. For the Greek word for babes is nueta paiota, generally used as the opposite to sigmo, the wise. It tends to the same effect when in the Gospels he often attacks the scribes and Pharisees and doctors of the law, whereas he faithfully defends the ignorant multitude. For what is woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, except woe unto you that are wise? But he seems to find most potent delight in little children, women, and fishermen, and even in the class of brute creatures. Those which are farthest from a fox-like cunning were best pleasing to Christ. He preferred to ride upon a donkey, though had he chosen he could have mounted the back of a lion without danger. And the Holy Spirit descended in likeness of a dove, not of an eagle or a kite. Add to this that Christ calls those who are destined to eternal life by the name sheep, and there is no other creature more foolish, as is witnessed by the proverbial phrase in Aristotle, sheepish temperament. And yet Christ avows himself as shepherd of this flock and even delights in the name of Lamb, as when John pointed him out, Behold the Lamb of God. What do all these things cry out to us, if not this, that mortal men, even the pious, are fools, and that Christ, in order to relieve the folly of mankind, was willing in some manner to be made a fool when he took upon himself the nature of a man? Nor did he wish to bring healing by any other means than by the foolishness of the cross, and by weak and stupid apostles upon whom he carefully enjoined folly, dissuading them from wisdom, while he incited them by the example of children, lilies, mustard seed, and sparrows, witless things and deficient in sense, living their lives by the guidance of nature with no art or anxious care. Beyond this, he forbade them to be troubled about what they should say before magistrates, and he charged that they should not inquire into times and seasons. In a word, they should not trust to their own wisdom, but wholly depend upon him. The Christian religion, on the whole, seems to have a kinship with some sort of folly, while it has no alliance whatever with wisdom. If you want proofs of this statement, observe first of all how children, old people, women, and fools find pleasure beyond other folk in holy and religious things, and to that end are ever nearest the altars, led no doubt solely by an impulse of nature. Then you will notice that the original founders of religion, admirably laying hold of pure simplicity, were the bitterest foes of literary learning. Lastly, no fool seemed to act more foolishly than do the people whom zeal for Christian piety has got possession of, for they pour out their wealth, they overlook wrongs, allow themselves to be cheated, make no distinction between friends and enemies, shun pleasure, glut themselves with hunger, wakefulness, tears, toils, and reproaches. They disdain life and dearly prefer death. In short, they seem to have grown utterly numb to ordinary sensations, quite as if their souls lived elsewhere and not in their bodies. What is this, forsooth, but to be mad? whereby we should find it less strange that the apostles appear to be drunk with new wine, and that Paul, in the eyes of his judge Festus, looked as if he had gone mad. Now that I have put on the lion's skin, I shall show this also, that the happiness of Christians, which they pursue with so much travail, is nothing else but a kind of madness and folly. Let these words give no offense. Instead, keep your mind on the point. To begin with, Christians come near to agreeing with Platonists in this, that the soul is sunk and shackled by corporeal bonds, being so clogged by the grossness of the body that but little can it contemplate and enjoy things as they truly are. And thus, as long as the soul uses the bodily organs aright, so long it is called sane, but when with its bonds broken it attempts to make good its liberty, planning, as it were, escape from its prison, then it is called mad. If perchance this condition arises from sickness or a defect of some organ, then by common consent it is unmistakable insanity. Yet we see men of this sort predict future events. We see them understand languages and discourse which they have not previously known, and in general manifest something partaking of the divine. No doubt this happens because as the soul is a little more free from the taint of the body, it begins to exert its own native powers. And so it ordinarily fares with men as it fared in Plato's myth between those who admired shadows, still bound in the cave, and that one who broke away and, returning to the doorway, proclaimed that he had seen realities and that they who believed nothing existed except shadows were greatly deceived. Just as this wise man pitied and deplored the madness of those who were gripped by such an error, they, on their side, derided him as if he were raving, and cast him out. In like fashion, the great masses of people admire what things are most corporeal, and deem that such come near to being the only things they are. The religious, on the contrary, pay less attention to anything the more nearly it concerns the body, and they are wholly wrapped away in the contemplation of things unseen. Wherefore, since there is so great contrariety between the pious and the vulgar, it comes about that each appears to the other to be mad. The pious are truly outside themselves. They say things that are not quite coherent, and this not in the ordinary way of men, but they make a sound without meaning, and suddenly they change the whole aspect of their faces. Now cheerful, now downcast, they will weep, then laugh, and then sigh. When presently they return to themselves, they say that they do not know where they have been, whether in the body or out of it, waking or sleeping. They do not remember what they have heard, seen, spoken, or done. And yet through a cloud, or as in a dream, they know one thing, that they were at their happiest while they were thus out of their wits. So they are sorry to come to themselves again, and would prefer, of all good things, nothing but to be mad always with this madness. And this is a tiny little taste of that future happiness which I have not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. This truly is the portion of folly, that good part which shall not be taken away by the transformation of life, but will be perfected. And so farewell. Applaud live drink, almost distinguished initiates of folly. Divine folly, the paradox at the heart of Christianity, that God chose the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, that Christ was found in fashion as a man, that the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness. The Christian religion has a kinship with folly so intimate that no alliance with wisdom can compare. Platonic madness of the pious, the soul, freed from bodily bonds, wanders outside itself in ecstasy, weeping, laughing, sighing, speaking things far above common strain. This is not ordinary insanity, but the highest form of divine possession, the foretaste of that future happiness which I hath not seen. The cave reversed, Plato's allegory turned upside down. The religious few who contemplate invisible things appear mad to the multitude, just as the philosopher who escaped the cave was thought raving by those who still mistook shadows for reality. Quote, God has chosen the foolish things of the world, and it has pleased God to save the world by foolishness, seeing that it could never be redeemed by wisdom. Quote, the happiness of Christians, which they pursue with so much travail, is nothing else but a kind of madness and folly. Conclusion. Desiderius Erasmus's The Praise of Folly accomplishes something rare in the history of Western letters. It takes the very concept that philosophy, theology, and law have conspired to eradicate, foolishness, and restores it to its rightful place at the center of human flourishing. Through the audacious conceit of letting Folly herself deliver the eulogy, Erasmus constructs an argument that proceeds from the comic to the cosmic, beginning with the trivial observation that fools are happier than wise men, and ending with the profound paradox that Christianity itself is a form of divine madness. The oration moves through Folly's divine ancestry, her dominion over pleasure and social life, and her intimate alliance with self-love and flattery. The three companions without whom no marriage, no friendship, no society could endure, before turning the corrosive lens on the very institutions that claim to have vanquished her. The philosophers, the lawyers, the physicians, the poets, the grammarians, the theologians, the monks, and the popes. The method is itself the message. By adopting the form of the encomium, the rhetorical genre of praise, and deploying it against its own conventions, Erasmus reveals the absurdity of the serious world's self-congratulation. The Stoics who scorn pleasure secretly depend on it. The theologians who claim to hold up the universal church by their syllogisms produce questions no apostle would recognize. The popes who wear vestments symbolizing purity and charity live in a splendor that would make Christ flee. The Sileni of Alcibiades, things that appear one way on the surface but reveal themselves as entirely different within, is not merely an illustration Erasmus borrows from Plato. It is the operative principle of the entire work. Every institution, every vocation, every claim to wisdom is a Silenus that must be opened before its true contents are known. Yet the deepest turn comes in the final movement, when Folly drops her mask and speaks as a Christian. Here Erasmus achieves his most startling inversion. The gospel itself declares that God chose the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, that Christ was found in fashion as a man, that the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness. The happiness of Christians, which they pursue with so much travail, is nothing else but a kind of madness and folly, a breaking free of the soul from its bodily bonds that appears to the multitude as insanity, but is in truth the highest form of divine possession. What begins as a jest ends as a theological proposition with teeth. Wisdom that cannot accommodate the masks people where, in the comedy of life, is no wisdom at all. The work's lasting significance lies not in its satirical targets, many of which are of its own moment, but in its insistence that the boundary between wisdom and folly is a human invention, and that the deepest truths often were the face of the fool. Key persons discussed. Desiderius Erasmus, 1466 to 1536, the author and orchestrator of the entire enterprise, a Dutch Renaissance humanist who wielded classical learning and Christian piety as twin instruments of reform. His narrator, Folly, speaks in his voice, but with a freedom that permits him to say what a sober theologian never could. Thomas More, 1478 to 1535, to whom the work is dedicated, and whose name is punned upon in the title, Morii encomium equals, in praise of More / in praise of Folly. More is Erasmus's ideal audience, a statesman who understands that the world is a comedy and plays his part accordingly. Plato, c. 428 to 348 BC, the philosopher whose Republic and Timaeus supply Erasmus with the allegory of the cave, the myth of the soul's imprisonment in the body, and the doctrine of divine madness, a concept Erasmus redeploys to argue that the pious are truly outside themselves in the best possible sense. Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC, whom the Stoics and Scholastics treat as an oracle, but whom Erasmus gently mocks for his remark about the sheepish temperament and for the way his authority has been turned into a substitute for thought. Seneca, c. 4 BC, AD 65, the Stoic moralist whom Erasmus subject to his most sustained critique, arguing that Seneca's portrait of the wise man, insensible to any natural sympathy, no more moved by feelings of love or pity than as if he were solid flint, produces not a human being but a marble simulacrum, that no city, no army, no woman would choose. Cicero, 106 to 43 BC, whose letter to Atticus, wishing for a dear madness, to lose his sense of the great evils of the time. Erasmus cites as evidence that even the greatest Roman orator recognized the blessedness of certain delusions. Horace, 65 to 8 BC, the poet of the Odes and Satires, whose phrase, a dear madness, cares furor, and whose portrait of the Greek in the theater who laughed at tragedies that were not being acted, serve as Erasmus's chief classical witnesses for the happiness of folly. Paul the Apostle, c. 64 AD, the New Testament author, whose declaration, "We are fools for Christ's sake," and whose teaching that God has chosen the foolish things of the world, provide the theological foundation for the work's final and most audacious claim, that Christianity itself is a form of divine folly. Solomon, the triple most wise king, who, in Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, confesses, "I am the most foolish of men," and enjoins folly as a thing specially necessary and good for the town. A testimony Erasmus deploys against the very theologians who claim Solomon's mantle. Jeremiah, the prophet whose testimony, "Every man is made foolish by his own wisdom," attributes wisdom to God alone and leaves folly as the universal portion of mortals. Christ, whom Erasmus presents not as the enemy of folly, but as its supreme practitioner, the one who prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," who rode upon a donkey, who called his followers sheep, and who redeemed the world by the foolishness of the cross. Key works discussed. Morii Encomium, the praise of folly, 1511, Erasmus's own work. The subject of this summary, a Latin oration in which folly praises herself, moving from comic self-promotion to a devastating satire of every human institution, and ending with a theological claim about the kinship between Christianity and madness. Republic, Plato the dialogue that supplies the allegory of the cave, prisoners mistaking shadows for reality, which Erasmus inverts to argue that the religious few who contemplate invisible things appear mad to the multitude, just as the philosopher who escaped the cave was thought raving by those who still mistook shadows for substance. Timaeus, Plato the dialogue concerning the soul's imprisonment in the body and the doctrine of divine madness, which Erasmus draws upon to argue that the Christian soul's escape from bodily bonds is not insanity, but the highest freedom. De Stultitia Sapientiae, on the folly of the wise, Erasmus's Latin title for the work, which captures the double edge of the argument. Folly is praised, but wisdom is shown to be its own form of foolishness. Adages, Adagia, Erasmus's massive collection of classical proverbs and glosses, which supplies many of the allusions and formulations that texture the oration. The Silene of Alcibiades, the proverbial sheepish temperament, the folk saying about premature wisdom. Enchiridion Militis Christiani, Handbook of the Christian Soldier, 1503, an earlier Erasmus work on the inner life of the Christian, which anticipates the theological turn of the praise of folly by insisting that true piety lies not in external observance, but in the transformation of the heart. Ecclesiastes, Solomon, the biblical book from which Erasmus draws Solomon's confession, "I am the most foolish of men," and the declaration that the number of fools is infinite, texts that, read against the theologian's pretensions, become weapons in folly's arsenal. Epistles of Paul to the Corinthians, the Pauline letters that provide the theological cornerstone of the work's conclusion. "We are fools for Christ's sake. God has chosen the foolish things of the world." Verses that Erasmus reads as an invitation to embrace folly as the mark of authentic faith. Letters to Atticus, Cicero, the correspondence in which Cicero wishes for a dear madness, to lose his sense of the great evils of the time. A passage Erasmus cites as proof that the wisest of Romans recognized the blessedness of certain delusions. Odes and Satires, Horace, the poetic works that supply the image of the dear madness, playing upon the poet and the portrait of the Greek who sat alone in the theater laughing at tragedies not being acted, both deployed as evidence that folly is not the negation of the good life, but its seasoning. Index of key concepts. Folly, Stultitia / Moria, the goddess who narrates the work, both a mythological personification and a philosophical principle. The recognition that foolishness, pleasure, and self-delusion are not defects to be eradicated, but the very conditions that make human life bearable. Folly's dominion extends over birth, friendship, marriage, social cohesion, and ultimately the Christian religion itself, where she reveals herself as the mother of divine madness. Self-love, Folly's closest companion, and the engine of all human accomplishment. The bias that makes each person believe themselves the center of the world and thus gives them the confidence to act. Without Philautia, the handsome Nereus appears as Thersites, the eloquent Nestor as the tongue-tied faun. Self-love is the universal solvent of discontent, the alchemy that transmutes inadequacy into confidence and mediocrity into genius. Flattery, the oil that lubricates the hinges of every court, parliament, and academy. The social art of making others feel pleased with themselves. Philautia is self-cajoling. Performs the same function for others, and together they sustain every human bond from marriage to monarchy. The Silene of Alcibiades, the image Erasmus borrows from Plato, things that appear one way on the surface but reveal themselves as entirely different when you look within. It is the operative principle of the entire work. Every institution, every vocation, every claim to wisdom is a Silenus that must be opened before its true contents are known. Divine madness, the paradox at the heart of Christianity, that God chose the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, that Christ was found in fashion as a man, that the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness. The Christian religion has a kinship with folly so intimate that no alliance with wisdom can compare, and the happiness of the pious is nothing else but a breaking free of the soul from its bodily bonds. The wise man, Stoic ideal, the creature the Stoics hold up as the pinnacle of human achievement, subtracted of all perturbations of the soul, every emotion, every passion, every weakness that makes us human. Erasmus's portrait of this marble simulacrum is a reductio ad absurdum. No city would choose such a creature as magistrate. No army would want that kind of general. No woman would pick that kind of husband. Scholastic labyrinth, the tangled web of realists, nominalists, Thomists, Albertists, Occamists, and Scotists, sects so numerous and subtle that you will escape from a labyrinth more quickly than from the tangles of their disputes, each claiming to hold up the universal church by the props of their syllogisms while producing questions no apostle would recognize. Ritual obsession, the monk's devotion to infinitesimal rules, not counts, girdle widths, hood measures, fast days, prayer counts, where each order believes its particular regimen the best religion in the world, yet all forget that Christ will demand reckoning of charity, not of ceremonies. Bishop's vestments, the symbolic garments, white alb for sincerity, two-horn mitre for scripture, gloves for clean administration, crozier for pastoral care, cross for victory over carnal affections, each a silent accusation against the prelate who wears them while abandoning every virtue they represent. The Platonic cave, reverse Plato's allegory turned upside down. The religious few who contemplate invisible things appear mad to the multitude, just as the philosopher who escaped the cave was thought raving by those who still mistook shadows for reality. The pious are truly outside themselves in the best possible sense, and what the vulgar call madness is in truth the highest form of divine possession. Reading comprehension questions. What is the morii encomium, and how does Erasmus use the form of the rhetorical encomium, traditionally reserved for praise of serious subjects, to subvert the conventions of the genre itself? How does the allegory of the Silene of Alcibiades function as the organizing principle of the entire oration? Trace its application across at least 3 of the social orders Erasmus satirizes. Explain the relationship between Philautia, self-love, and flattery, as Erasmus describes them. How do these two companions sustain social life? And what would happen to friendship and marriage if they were removed? Erasmus distinguishes between 2 kinds of madness, the Furies' madness and Folly's madness. What is the difference? And why does he argue that the second kind is not only harmless, but essential to human happiness? What does Erasmus mean when he says that the wise man, as described by Seneca, is a marble simulacrum? What values does Erasmus assume a truly wise person would need to possess, and how does the Stoic ideal fail to meet them? How does the concept of divine folly reshape the argument in the final movement of the oration? What biblical text does Erasmus cite, and how does he reinterpret them to argue that Christianity itself is a form of sacred madness? Consider the value assumption embedded in Erasmus's argument. He assumes that happiness, social cohesion, and a capacity for love are higher goods than intellectual rigor and philosophical truth. Where might a defender of the Stoic or scholastic tradition push back, and what would their counterargument be? Erasmus includes a catalog of national self-flattery: English, Scottish, French, Italian, Roman, Venetian, Greek, Turkish, Jewish, Spanish, German. What does this passage reveal about the relationship between philautia at the individual level and collective identity? Is this a descriptive claim about human nature or a prescriptive warning about nationalism?